let's see. Give me one sec just to double check things. We are loading. Thank you for your patience. All right, okay. So I'm joining a little bit early to give people the chance to hop on, so bear with me. We've got a little bit less than a minute before we get started. I hope everybody's had a very nice weekend so far. Depending on where you live, it's probably hot, so I hope you're all staying cool, drinking water, but still finding a way to enjoy the time outside or inside, depending on what the day holds as well too. We are officially in some of the last months of nesting season, so I hope you guys have been enjoying any fledglings that you've been seeing. And of course, we are still in molting season as well, so that should be a lot of fun too. So keep an eye out for any birds that are trying to get their new feathers in. Okay, so we've hit 8:30, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. Good morning, everyone. Thanks so much for joining me today. My name is Jolene. I'm a certified songbird feeding specialist with Wild Birds Unlimited of Concord, and today we'll be talking about goldfinches. A lot of the focus will be on American goldfinches. They're very popular with a wide variety of people that feed their birds, so I hope you guys learn a lot. If you have any questions during the presentation, I'll be keeping an eye on the comments as well. So I see some people said hello, so good morning. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. We're going to go ahead and just get started. So with goldfinches in general, they're still in the order Passeriformes with a lot of our other perching songbirds, but more specifically, they're in the family Fringillidae. That means they're closest related to, of course, other finches, but we've got grosbeaks, crossbills, siskins, and redpolls as well too. For goldfinches specifically, they prefer more weedy fields or open areas with some shrubs or trees that they can use for nesting, and of course locations with a lot of plants that they'll use for nesting material as well. If we look at the map on the right here, these birds do have a shorter migration pattern, so they kind of do stay in one continent and kind of fluctuate a little bit farther north or south depending on where they live in the range. So this purple area in the middle of the map is going to be where they're found year-round. In the summertime, as temperatures get a little bit warmer, they actually increase their range up into further Canada, up here, and as things get cooler and they're not as hot, they do actually venture farther south. There's actually 3 species of goldfinches that we have in North America, but the American goldfinch most likely has like the widest range of the 3. So for those of us in North Carolina, you're going to notice we're right here, which means we are right on the edge of their year-round habitat and then their wintering habitat. So depending on where you live, you might only get goldfinches during a specific time of the year. So it's very important to kind of, not very important, but if you really want to know when your goldfinches are around, take note, keep a journal. Like during certain days of the year, if you notice that they're there, mark it so that you can refer to it the next year, even if it's just through photos and checking when you took the photo. It's a whole lot of fun to kind of help get a pattern set in as well too. The oldest goldfinch to date was one that was, of course, banded through one of those, oh my goodness, it's one of those mornings. Through one of the banding practices, they recorded the age as 10 years and 9 months old. So they do pretty well for themselves. So when it comes to identification, a lot of people know these birds as the bright yellow. And so usually when you see that yellow, you're like, oh, goldfinch, perfect. But there are a lot of other birds that are that kind of yellow color. And they're not always yellow, the goldfinches. So we're going to talk a little bit about identification in general. So first off, ignoring all the colors, because that's very important to do sometimes. Let's focus on the shape. Compared to other finches and even sparrows, the goldfinch has a very conical beak. It's pretty straightforward. You notice it's not going to have really a curve or anything. It is like almost a perfect cone, which is a lot of fun. So that is very distinct for the goldfinches as well. They have shorter legs in comparison to some other birds, and they also have a tail that's kind of on the shorter end, but it's also notched. They're about a medium-sized bird, closer to kind of like your bluebird size, if that kind of makes sense. So that's kind of what your focus is on size in relation to that as well too. Now, when it comes to color, things can get a little bit complicated because we're going to be looking at a few different things. And hello, everybody tuning in. Thanks so much for paying attention. I appreciate it. First off, goldfinches are, at least the American goldfinch, is sexually dimorphic, which means that your males are going to be a slightly different color from your females. So even here, you can tell that your male goldfinches are going to be more of a bright yellow in comparison to the females, who sometimes have a little bit more of that olive green kind of mixed in. So they're bright, but not as much, okay? And then we're also going to focus on the fact that American goldfinches have both a breeding plumage and a non-breeding plumage. So what that means is in the summertime, in the early spring, these birds get their bright colors to help attract the females and get ready for nesting. So for the males, they have that bright black cap on the top of the head, the yellow body feathers. They have the black wings, which are consistent throughout the year. So that is a big giveaway if you're looking at a goldfinch. And then they have a thin white wing bar during the summertime. Along with that, these birds also do have an orange bill in comparison to other parts of the year. So this is going to be primarily in the spring and the summer. Now, when fall hits, it completely changes. So we've got their non-breeding plumage. And this is because they're no longer nesting. They no longer need to bring attention to themselves to attract a mate. So in this case, both your males and females look very similar. They've lost a lot of their yellow, but you can tell that the males still have a good portion of it up by their head and their throat as well too. Their wings are still black, but you're going to notice that the wing bars on there are much broader. Okay, we'll talk more about that too a little bit later. But you can tell they both focus more on that kind of olive green, that kind of brown gray color, and their bill is no longer that bright orange color too. So it's really interesting to kind of see that transition. So pay attention to that in the winter time because you could still have goldfinches around. They might just not look as yellow as you think they do. So two ways to identify these birds as well, if you can't get a really good look at them, is that they do have a very bouncy kind of flight. So they kind of go back and forth like this. So that can sometimes be a giveaway as well. And they do have a call that a lot of people say sounds like a potato chip kind of call, which is a little hard for me to hear because I'm not very good for like the onomatopoeias, but something like this. So it's kind of that kind of four-note call. Another type of call you might hear kind of sounds like a tee or a bait. There's a few different ways. So I hear this one very commonly. So you will very often hear this in the summertime. And it has that potato chip call. But they're probably they're more fun calls. But when it comes to their songs, they get a little bit more chaotic. So they're rules of reference where we usually say, oh, the songs are easier to identify. You can tell what kind of song these birds have, but it is harder to nail down. Because sometimes it can be a little bit more random. So you have one bird that incorporates those kinds of similar calls, but then you have another bird that kind of goes like this. So it gets a little chaotic. It's a lot of twitters and warbles. So kind of paying attention to their calls more than their songs might help you out with identification a little bit more as well too. So like I mentioned, there's 3 species in North America. Out west, you guys also have the lesser goldfinch and the Lawrence's goldfinch as well too. So you'll notice that the body shapes are very similar. They're going to be of kind of similar size as well too. But again, of the 3, the American goldfinch has the widest range, so that's who I'm kind of focusing on today as well. So when it comes to the diet of goldfinches, these guys are more herbivorous, which means they focus on plant materials such as coneflowers, grasses, and tree seeds and things like that as well. But not only are they herbivorous, but they are so hardcore in the herbivorous aspect that they have one of the most strict diets in the bird world. So for example, cardinals, they enjoy a lot of seed options, but they do hit on some insects and eat those in the summertime. So it kind of depends on what they need for their diet. Goldfinches are strict. They're like, no, we're focusing on plants. Thanks, we'll do that just fine. So some advantages they have for this is that conical bill that they have. And actually, I just got a video, so we're going to go ahead and enjoy this for a hot second. Some advantages that these birds have is those shorter, strong legs, which allow them to cling to a variety of locations. So you can see these birds hanging upside down, sideways. They have no problem holding on to a variety of plants while they're eating and getting out smaller seeds. The conical bill that they have is perfect for pulling out those smaller seeds in like thistle plants, milkweeds, other things as well that allows them to access that too. So they're made very well for these kind of small seed diets, if that makes sense too. So it's very fun to watch them forage on natural plant options as well too, if you've never seen that. I know there's also a lot of finch feeders with like the upside down option to see them kind of eat upside down, because they are very good about that as well too. Okay. And another thing as well, something that happens a lot during any time of year, but also in the winter time, is these birds do focus on a foraging path. So it's not uncommon to have goldfinches for quite a good portion of the year, and then you notice they kind of pick a different location. Maybe it's for a few weeks, maybe it's for a few months, but they do have a tendency to jump from place to place because they have to make their rounds, because they know that's where some good oh my goodness, some good food options are. So they'll kind of go from place to place as needed. So even if you sometimes offer food that they really enjoy, sometimes they'll keep picking different locations until they come back around. So don't be surprised if you see them back and forth at your location as well too. So one thing that their diet also allows is that the food that they eat actually contains something called carotenoids. This is a type of protein that produces red, yellow, and orange pigmentation. I'm sure you know where I'm going with this. For the goldfinches specifically, when they eat these plant items, they contain those yellow pigmentations that they need so that it becomes that bright yellow that we love in the summertime. So what happens is right before they molt, they basically are able, depending on how many carotenoids they eat and get in their diet, will determine how bright yellow they are in the summertime as well too. So it's really interesting. So the brighter the bird, you know that they had very good access to good food resources as well. Good morning, everybody. Thank you. So something also that happens, and we kind of talked about this before, is molting. And for goldfinches, it's a lot of work. So molting is the process where birds shed old feathers to grow new ones. We're in the process of that right now. It happens a lot in the fall time. Usually it depends on the species, but some birds molt once a year, some birds molt twice a year as well too. Goldfinches are one of those birds that molt twice a year. So as we get closer to September and their nesting season is done, these birds will have a complete molt of all of their feathers in September for the winter time. So that means they'll get rid of all their body feathers, their wing feathers, tail feathers, all that kind of stuff. And it's not like all at once. They kind of do it in a pattern simultaneously on both sides, so they can still fly and get around, but they're not, completely bald birds, which would be an interesting choice. But once they do that, those feathers remain there until they do a partial molt in the spring. So this means that they keep their wing and their tail feathers, but their body feathers are the ones that molt. So those kind of duller kind of brown-gray feathers molt out for the bright yellow ones for your nesting season as well. So that's one method of molting, of course, where you kind of lose all your feathers, of course, like that. But one thing I want to point out too is I kind of made note of that wing bar that these birds have on their wings, right? So they only molt their wing feathers once a year. So they have that broader white wing bar in September, okay? So what happens is that as those feathers are used, that wing bar is actually worn down. So instead of molting, as the wing bar is, worn down, by the time that nesting season comes around, they actually have a nice thin wing bar that just causes that, that just happens naturally over time from being worn down like that. So it's a really interesting process. If you have starlings, they actually do the same thing where there's a lot of speckling this time of year, but as they continue to use those feathers, they get worn down and show that sleek kind of iridescent color in the summertime. Hopefully that made sense. I saw myself stuttering a little bit there, but it's a really interesting process to see how that stuff always works as well. So I try my best to explain that. So in this case, they've kind of done their early spring molting, And because they molt twice a year, it takes a lot of work. So at this point in time, goldfinches are one of the later nesters in the season. So they nest anywhere from July to August. There are a few theories for this, one of which is the fact that because they molt so close to summertime, there are some nutritional delays because a lot of the nutrition that goes towards molting their feathers would also go to eggshell development. So they have to take a little bit more time to rebuild those nutritions. Not only that, but they're also waiting for a lot of their nesting plants to flower, which of course happen later in the summertime. So plants like milkweed, thistle, or other fibrous plants that they need will only begin to like kind of flower and seed in that later summer. So that's kind of those two reasons as to why they're later nesters. But once the time comes and a little bit beforehand, we've got a lot of courtship going on where the males will perform fluttering flight displays while singing for the females and of course showing off all of their bright colors. So once again, the females make the final choice and they prefer the males with the brighter plumage, which we kind of talked about before. The reason they have that brighter plumage is because they have access to good territory and because they're also excellent foragers. So because of those things, chances of them being able to successfully raise offspring is higher. So that's why females kind of prefer those choices as well too, which is really interesting. Once they have found their partner, the pair works together to find a suitable nest site. They're usually going for some small shrubs and trees. They usually go for a nice Y branch as well too, as you can kind of see here. And it's usually going to be shaded with leaves from above, so it's not going to be very open from up top. The female is the one that focuses on building the nest, and it can take anywhere from 6 to 15 days, and for good reason. These are some pretty chunky nests. Basically, it's just a compact cup nest made of tree rootlets and plant fiber. They secure it together with spider silk, very similar to how hummingbirds do that to their own nests. And it's actually so compact with material that studies have found that it can actually hold water for a short amount of time. So that's probably why it's covered from above to keep that there as well too. But it's always interesting to notice how differently birds make their own nest as well too, because we've talked about doves and tanagers and how they have very thin nests, which is an interesting contrast as well. So from here, you can also see that they have pretty plain kind of light blue eggs as well, pale bluish white. They have anywhere from 1 to 2 broods. Because they nest so late in the summertime, a lot of their focus usually goes into one brood. But if that nest is damaged or something happens to the first brood, they can occasionally work on a second if they need to. They can have anywhere from 2 to 7 eggs, but the average is about 4 to 5, depending on what's going on. And once they have laid all of their eggs, and it takes them about a day to lay each egg, they're going to start incubating them for around 12 to 14 days, so about 2 weeks. And once those eggs have hatched, they're in that nestling period where they are altricial young, so they're defenseless and they're naked. They have like a few downy tufts, but they require the parent's care. So this is a really good photo of one of those goldfinch nestlings. You can also see right here is actually a lot of the food that's being stored in the crop before it gets digested. So you know they are being fed very well. But once they hatch, they're in that nestling phase from anywhere to 11 to 17 days, so a little bit about 2.5 weeks, depending on how well they're doing. And then they get into that fledgling phase. So just as a reminder, fledglings are able to leave the nest, but they don't always have all of their tail feathers. They might still have some of those downy tufts. They're still kind of getting their lives together, but they're still able to move and kind of fly a little bit, that they can, they don't have to stay in the nest as well too. You'll find that they look very similar to the non-breeding plumage. It looks a little bit darker on those wing bars, so they'll kind of molt a little bit of those, oh my goodness, they'll molt those juvenile feathers a little later on, and they won't get their nice, bright breeding plumage until that next spring as well too. So when it comes to attracting finches to the feeders, there's a few different ways to do this. So I'm going to talk about them all in some way, and we'll go over the specifics of each. One of which that people probably focus on the most is finch feeders. A finch feeder can come in a variety of shapes and sizes, including finch socks, finch tubes, which look very similar to seed tubes, but with smaller ports. And then, of course, mesh finch feeders, which basically look similar to this, but usually they're a metal style. These all have those smaller port openings made for smaller styles of seed. Usually it's made for the Niger seed, which a lot of people also know as the thistle seed, because it's actually not thistle, but it's very close to. So it kind of fills in that kind of food option there. So usually you can do the Niger seed, or you can have blends of the Niger plus other options. We carry both the Niger seed and then the Finch blend, which is a mix of Niger and sunflower chips chopped up super small, so it fits in those ports. One thing I will say is finch feeding is definitely something that's a little bit more higher maintenance, or definitely takes a little bit more care, because the Niger seed can easily be affected by the weather. If it rains, if it's too dry, if it's very humid, sometimes it can get pretty clumpy. If it dries out, then it's not going to have the nutrition that the finches are looking for, and it can also sometimes mold. So it's important to pay attention to these feeders and check on them at least every 2 weeks. Definitely check on it more often if needed, because it will have issues if it's humid or rainy, because it can get kind of moldy in there as well too. So if you have one of the tube feeders, or like the finch tubes with the Niger in there, Feeder Fresh is a great option. That's a non-toxic and especially safe option to mix with the seed that helps absorb the moisture, so your seed stays fresh for longer as well too. If they manage to get a hold of the Feeder Fresh, usually they'll just kind of drop it, or it acts as like a type of grit. So it's completely safe for the birds in that way as well too. If you do have any Niger and you're not sure if it's good because the goldfinches aren't really hitting it, one thing that you can do is you can put a little bit of Niger seed in between a piece of paper or newspaper and just kind of grind down on it a little bit with like something heavy like a hammer, or anything that you have on hand really. And what that does is it releases any oil that could be in that seed. So when you open up that paper, if you see any oil residue, that means the seed is still good. If it's just dry and crunchy and you're not getting anything, the Niger is very old, and it's recommended to go ahead and get some new stuff as well too, because the goldfinches do know the difference between good and stale food as well, and they will certainly let you know that too. So if you're looking into getting a finch feeder and haven't started yet, I definitely recommend starting off small, seeing what you think about it and the process. And if you're pretty happy with the activity that you're getting, then you can get a better style finch feeder or a larger one as well too. Now, if you're not a fan of finch feeders, or you've tried that before and that hasn't gone very successfully for you, or if you're not sure you even have finches in the area, something that I recommend, whether you have a hopper feeder, tube feeder, tray feeder, or a seed cylinder feeder, is getting a blend with sunflower hearts or sunflower chips. This is literally just deshelled sunflower. It's a very popular option. I found that goldfinches are such suckers for sunflower hearts. So they do enjoy black oil sunflower, but if you really want to get them on your good side, offer some of this in the feeders. It is, of course, a very popular option for everyone, so keep that in mind. The finch feeders themselves are great if you want to attract just finches, but if you're happy with pretty much anyone and just want to offer something for your finches, sunflower hearts are a great way to go for any style blend. Regardless of what kind of feeder you have, it is important to keep feeders clean. Goldfinches themselves can be very susceptible to a variety of diseases. Most commonly is one called conjunctivitis. This is what some people could kind of refer to as a worst kind of pink eye for your bird. So oftentimes it affects the eyes, where they become swollen shut and they're not able to see anything, which for a bird who can't access food resources or keep an eye out for predators, this can be very dangerous. So if you happen to notice any of this kind of behavior for any of your birds, you can go ahead and contact a wildlife rehabber in your area. But if you do happen to see this at your feeders, keep in mind that conjunctivitis can be very contagious. So if the bird makes contact with the bird feeder and another bird who does not have it yet makes contact with the same feeder, it can be spread contact to contact. So how do we clean our feeders? Go ahead and empty it out. You want to get a container or a bin, fill it with soap and water, let the feeder soak, and go ahead and brush out the inside and the outside. Basically having somewhere set for this. It's easier if you let them soak. Rinse them off, and it's also good to sanitize with a solution of 1 part bleach to 9 parts water. Rinse it out and then let them dry, and it's set to rehang. If you do have that conjunctivitis in your yard, I recommend keeping your feeders down for at least 2 weeks. to kind of let that whole situation kind of calm down. You can bring your feeder back out, and if you find the conjunctivitis bird is still there, take that feeder down, wait through that process one more time. But if you find that it's finally cleared up, you can continue with having your feeders out. So that's an important thing to kind of pay attention to, because again, even though we enjoy seeing our birds, we enjoy it even more when they are happy and healthy. So that's an important thing that we kind of have to pay attention to. Now let's say, all right, Jolene, I really don't want to do any kind of bird feeding, but I do enjoy my birds, or I don't have access to feed my birds. There's still a few different options. One of which, like I mentioned, these birds are kind of late season nesters. Right now, we're kind of at the tail end of their nesting season, but you can definitely still offer nesting material next year. Things like cotton, kind of like those cotton nest balls, are a great option to offer for your goldfinches. Or if you want to offer and consider native plants, these are a fantastic resource because you don't really even have to do too much. They just kind of grow and do well in the environment on their own. But if you're not too sure about what native plants work best in your area, we're actually going to hop over to Audubon, www.audubon.org/native-plants. We're going to jump over there for a second. All they ask is for your email and your zip code. If you hit search there, it's going to bring up a native plant database. And basically, you can kind of filter different types of resources, what birds you want it to attract. In this case, let's see, hold on. We are looking at finches. So we're going to do that really quick. And basically, you can search through different types of trees or shrubs. Let's say we're looking at annuals. And basically, it gives you a variety of food options that the finches enjoy and that you could also consider for your yard. So you can add these to your plant list. It also has an option for buying now, but it depends on when these options are in season as well, too. So native plants are a great resource that helps a lot of our local wildlife, whether that's your birds, your insects like your butterflies, or things like that as well. So it's definitely recommended to kind of check this out. It's much easier to care for than like your oh my goodness, some plants that sometimes happen to be invasive or more ornamental, and they don't always take as much care. So definitely something to consider if you haven't before. I highly recommend it, and it would benefit basically everybody, which is always a very good time. So definitely, you've got a lot of different options to attract your goldfinches. I know for sure with goldfinches in general, patience is key because even though you set up your finch feeder, sometimes they may not always be in the area because they are on those foraging paths. So have patience, change out your seed as needed, keep it fresh, and just keep on the lookout. So those are all just kind of different things to consider. I hope you guys learned a lot today. All About Birds is a great resource to get a lot of generalized information about your birds, including photo identification, song ID, and a little bit more about their habitat and things as well too. Macaulay Library is a great scientific resource where people post a lot of audio, photo, and video recordings of many birds from around the world, and is a great resource to check out as well too if you want more information on that as well. Thank you guys so much for coming in today. I really appreciate it. I hope you guys have a wonderful time, and we will see you next time. Enjoy the birds until then.